In just 8 minutes, get the most explosive insights from Viktor Orban's one-hour interview with Tucker Carlson, posted on February 15th, 2025. Orban pulls no punches as he exposes Western hypocrisy, NATO's silence on Nord Stream, the Ukraine war reality, and the failure of mass migration. Stay till the end. You won't want to miss this. Here are the key takeaways from the podcast. Takeaway 1. Orban's predictions were right. Years ago, Orban was criticized for his policies on secure borders, traditional values, and low taxes. He was seen as an outlier in Europe. Over time, many of his warnings about mass migration, liberal policies, and economic struggles in Europe have proven correct. He believes that the shift in Western thinking, especially in the US under Trump, has validated Hungary's approach. He jokes that for 15 years, Hungary was like a lone island fighting a liberal ocean, but now Trump has taken all the attention in global politics. For example, in 2015, Hungary built a border fence to stop mass migration, which was heavily criticized. Today, many European nations are reconsidering open border policies. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2, USAID's hidden role in Hungary. The US government, particularly USAID and other agencies, secretly funded opposition groups in Hungary. Orban calls this an attack on Hungary's sovereignty using American taxpayer money. He says 60-plus organizations, politicians, and media outlets in Hungary were financially supported by the U.S. to push liberal ideology. He humorously notes that conspiracy theorists need to find new ideas because the old ones turned out to be true. For example, Hungary found that U.S. funds were being used to promote left-wing media and activist groups that oppose the government. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3, why the West promotes mass migration. Orban believes Western liberals push mass migration and gender ideology not just for ideological reasons, but also for financial gain. He says leftist leaders genuinely believe that blending cultures will create a better society, even though he finds this idea ridiculous. He points out the hypocrisy. No one forces China, India, or Japan to accept mass migration, only Western nations. He argues that migration has become an industry, benefiting smugglers, NGOs, and even political elites. For example, George Soros openly proposed that Europe should take in 1 million migrants per year, an idea Orban finds absurd. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4, has mass migration worked? Orban says the migration experiment in Europe has largely failed. Many migrants are not refugees but economic migrants seeking better lives, often smuggled in through illegal networks. The result has been rising crime, terrorism, and social tensions in countries like Germany and France. He warns that mass migration is now not just a demographic issue, but a direct threat to democracy itself, as public opinion is ignored. For example, recent elections in Germany showed 70% of people want stricter migration laws, yet politicians refuse to act. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5, Europe's economy is falling behind. 30 years ago, the European Union had the world's largest economy. Today, it has fallen to third place. Orban blames bad leadership, high energy prices, and a lack of strategy. Europe relied on cheap Russian energy and high-tech industries, but after cutting ties with Russia, it has no backup plan. He warns that if nothing changes within 3 years, the European economy could collapse. For example, Europe pays up to 6 times more for gas than the US, making industries uncompetitive. We're halfway through the video. Thank you for sticking with us this far. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. To see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. NATO's strange silence on Nord Stream. The US destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, an act of industrial terrorism against its own NATO ally, Germany. Orban is shocked that no European leader dares to challenge the US on this issue. He recalls a past scandal when the US was caught spying on Germany's chancellor, but even then, Germany stayed silent. He suggests Europe's elites have an unwritten rule. If Washington says something is not an issue, then no one questions it. For example, when Carlson brings up Nord Stream in Europe, politicians awkwardly try to change the subject. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. Russia will never trust the West. Again, the war in Ukraine was not about Ukraine itself, but about NATO expansion. Orbán says Russia will never allow NATO to move closer to its borders, no matter how much the West insists. He believes the war has actually made Russia stronger, both militarily and economically. Because of Western hostility, Russia has now fully aligned itself with China, likely for the next 100 years. For example, even if the West wanted to bring Russia back into economic cooperation, Russia now sees China as its safest partner. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. The West miscalculated the Ukraine war. Western leaders assumed Russia would collapse under sanctions and military pressure. Orbán, even in 2022, said Russia had a huge population and military advantage, so Ukraine stood no chance. He believes Ukraine miscalculated by thinking the West would support them indefinitely. The reality is that Western patience is running out, and soon Ukraine will be forced to negotiate peace. For example, just this week, the U.S. Defense Secretary confirmed that Ukraine will not be joining NATO, something Russia demanded from the start. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. The European public wants peace. Most Europeans are now against continued war in Ukraine. However, liberal politicians are afraid to admit this because they've been pushing war propaganda for years. Changing positions overnight would destroy their credibility, so they continue acting as if nothing has changed. Orbán expects the pressure for peace talks to grow, especially with Trump's likely return. For example, recent polls show the majority of Europeans now support peace negotiations over sending more weapons. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. Central Europe has a brighter future. Unlike Western Europe, Central and Eastern European countries are optimistic about their future. Orbán believes this is because they had to fight for their freedom from Soviet rule, while Western Europeans inherited democracy without struggle. He sees Central Europe, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, as the new rising power bloc. He warns that if Western Europe does not change course, it will continue declining. For example, a survey showed that in countries like France and Germany, most people believe their children will have a worse future, while in Hungary and Poland, most believe the future will be better. Here are some final thoughts. These takeaways paint a picture of a changing world where Europe is struggling, while Hungary and other Central European nations may be on the rise. Do you agree with Orbán's views on migration in the future of Europe? Comment below with your thoughts. For those of us who don't know, Hungary's Viktor Orban is by far the longest-serving head of state in Europe, and by this point has been vindicated on pretty much everything. So when he says that going forward it's Ukraine, not Russia, that may be the biggest threat to the West, it's worth paying attention. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this summary of the Tucker Carlson podcast with Viktor Orban informative. If you're interested in learning more about these topics, I encourage you to watch the full podcast on YouTube. Link in description. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. You can also discuss about this video by commenting below. To get more such videos in your timeline, press the subscribe button below.